Here we go. We're going to be looking today at interest groups, and in this video we're just going to be talking about the basics of interest groups and some of the big ideas that we are going to be learning about during this week in this chapter. Main points of this chapter, we're going to be talking about, how and why interest groups are a natural part of our political system in the United States. We're going to look at the different functions and jobs interest groups perform. We're going to look at what lobbying is and why it often gets a bad rap. And then we're finally going to look at the topic of the government, federal government, trying to regulate and limit the negative effects of interest groups. And we'll look at some of that. And throughout these little presentations, you'll notice, and I hope you giggle a little bit at some of these political cartoons. There are some hilarious political cartoons on lobbying and interest groups. And a group that's been getting a lot of attention, positive and negative, is the National Rifle Association and their ability to influence policy, not just at the national congressional level and the president in some cases, but also state and locally. And we'll talk more about the NRA in this video. Alright, so a little bit about interest groups. Very simply, they're any type of organization that's trying to influence public policy. They don't necessarily have to be somebody like the NRA. It could be an organization or a company like Apple or Microsoft that want the government to do things that benefit them. And then going with interest groups is the concept of lobbying and lobbyists. And these are the physical actions that interest groups do or hire people to influence government to, get government to help them out. And as you know from previous assignments, K Street is this famous place in Northwest Washington where a lot of lobbying firms work out of, and oftentimes the media refers to K Street as this is the headquarters of lobbying in the United States. Cool. And lobbyists obviously are the people who do the lobbying. Going back, a little bit of review, we've talked about Federalist number 10 many times. It's something that comes up on the AP exam, definitely want to know it. We talked about factions, how you have these groups that are united in trying to promote a policy, may not be in the best interest of all Americans. And Madison talks about how factions are going to happen. When you give people liberty, they are going to use it for positive and use it for negative uses. And he was more concerned about having one single group dominate the country, and therefore what did he suggest? As you can see in the picture here, he was all about splitting up power, decentralizing power. He didn't want to remove the liberty, because if you take away people's liberty, sure, factions will go away, but what will happen to all our freedoms, and what the heck did we fight the revolution for? So separation of powers, federalism, checks and balances, these built-in mechanisms in our Constitution were supposed to limit factions. And you can argue that it's been pretty successful. Our country's been working, relatively speaking, for the last few hundred years. Another great political cartoon, we'll look at this one more in class, but you just look at the negative tone that interest groups get from media, get from editorial cartoonists. This one, once again, makes you giggle just a little bit. We'll talk more about it in class. All right, another concept that comes up that we bring back here is pluralism. And pluralism, once again, is another concept that you will probably likely see on the AP exam in May. And the idea of pluralism, as you know, is when you have lots and lots of groups competing for power. And the idea here is that because you have so many groups competing for power, it's really hard for one or a few groups to have all the power in terms of having power in influencing legislators, presidents, policymakers. And so here you have some great imagery of people at the Capitol buildings, asking Congress to stop deportation raids, and then you have, you know, two sets. You have people that want to keep abortion legal, another group of people here who want to stop abortion, right in front of this old building here, my favorite in Washington, the Supreme Court. And so you have, you know, people, different ideas, trying to get the attention of policymakers. That's what pluralism is all about. All right. So let's get into some of the jobs and roles of interest groups. One of the big things they do is they raise awareness and interest in a variety of issues, whether it's interest in terms of people or politicians. They do a lot of educating about issues. Once again, not just politicians, but sometimes people. And as we've been talking about, you know, this whole little unit is all about linkage institutions. Interest groups fit this perfectly. They are something in the middle between the government and the people, and they provide a connection, whether it's through the ratings they do, which we'll talk about, or endorsing candidates for office. They play a big role in connecting people to the government. And then another big function is actually providing information. And this is really something you got to keep in mind. Sometimes when we think about interest groups and lobbying, we only think about negative things. They do provide a lot of useful information to help make policy. If you take a look at this, this screenshot here, this is from Forbes magazine, and here you have right here, it's saying the National Association of Realtors reported that previously owned homes, the sales of previously owned homes fell 1.9% in September. This is big information because, you know, if homes aren't selling, that could say something about our economy and could have big effects in the future. And so this is something that politicians will want to know, the media will cover, could affect future policy making. All right, take a look at this scenario. Say you spent months working evenings and weekends to pitch in on an effort to persuade lawmakers to pass clean air legislation. Then suppose that legislation passed and actually improved air quality. Even if your best friend spent evenings and weekends watching TV, surfing Facebook, and going out on the town instead of working for clean air, you cannot exclude your friend from enjoying the clean air. You both get to breathe it since that air is a public good. What is wrong with this scenario? Well, this is what's called the free rider phenomenon. Another topic you will likely see on the AP exam in May, or a test or a quiz with me, hint hint. This is when a group or a people, they benefit from the work of an interest group or lobbyist, but they don't necessarily put in or contribute to making these benefits happen. And this is a real big issue interest groups face. To combat this problem, to fix this, what a lot of interest groups do is they actually provide benefits. They provide tangible benefits to the organization. One of the most powerful interest groups is the AARP. Represents older Americans, and it has tens of millions of supporters, of members, because it only costs about $16 a year to join. And when you join, you get magazines, you get discounts at restaurants, on insurance, on all sorts of stuff. You take AAA, you know, most people think of AAA, they think about being on the side of the road and, you know, calling AAA to have them come tow their car or something like that. Well, AAA is actually an interest group that fights for better roads. And one of the reasons, you know, they're able to have so many members is because they provide a service, and by providing that service, they get members who contribute money to make their organization, you know, function. All right. The next thing we're going to get into are different types of interest groups. I'm not going to focus too much on this because, I mean, a lot of this is simple, common sense stuff. These are some of the big ones. The National Beer Wholesalers, what are they up there for? Well, they do contribute a lot of money to candidates. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, really big interest group, we'll talk more about them, and as well as the AARP, which we just mentioned. You have this historical conflict between labor groups and business groups, labor groups and unions trying to promote the interests of workers. Do you want to take a guess at what political party they tend to support? Yep, the Democrats, typically. And then you have business groups like the National Chamber of Commerce promoting the interests of businesses. You want to take a guess at which political party they tend to support? All right, well, I already gave you the other one. So yeah, it's Republicans. And then you also have a lot of professional education groups. You have the NEA, the American Medical Association. We talked about the National Association of Realtors. Not only do they provide, trainings and information for their members, doctors, teachers, lawyers, real estate agents, but they also lobby and try to get the government to make policies to benefit them as well. You have different interest groups, the ACLU, National Rifle Association, that focus on very specific issues, and we'll talk more about these a little bit later. Different welfare groups, the AARP, the NAACP, which we'll get into a little bit more. And then you also have, religious interest groups. The Christian Coalition, huge impact since the 1980s, and as well as AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, that works to promote issues that protect Israel. Somewhat controversial. We'll look at the video and talk about that a little bit in class. I love this cartoon here because here you have George Bush. He's trying to promote this idea of privatizing Social Security, and look who's in his way, the AARP. And so I think this does a really good job of kind of, showing you the power an interest group can have when it comes to, promoting or deterring policy from happening. Some data on interest groups. Thank you, Mr. Shulman. You might need some more coffee. As you look at some of this data, you want to focus on, which interest groups were spending more money. Take a look at membership of different interest groups, and consider what are the effects of having lots of members. What are the effects of being able to fundraise so much money? And if you look here, it asks, do they have a PAC, a political action committee, that collects money to donate to candidates? We'll talk more about that. All right, that's all for now. In a coming video, we will look at different strategies interest groups perform in their attempts to get the government to help them out. Until then, adios.